We are the weirdos, mister.
Now today I'm going to be reacting to a video from Waving the Red Flag, which is a podcast that I used to be subscribed to, and I unsubscribed. The guys didn't do anything like terrible or whatever, as far as I'm aware, because they have thoughtful conversations. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't. The thing is, if you are subscribed to too many men, you just get too many men in your space. But they recently did a video called Marriage is Sex Work. Here's the marriage with sex work section. This is where the editing begins. Love you.
To say, but marriage also is sex work, because a lot of women, what they're doing is, and this is controversial to say.
I'm gonna hear this.
It's controversial and wrong.
About prostitution, where you know, like, you sleep with a man, you get money, or you hang out with him, you get money. Why I say marriage is prostitution is because what happens is women engage in marriage from a place where, okay, ideally he's gonna take care of you financially, and there's a home for you both to live in. And what you are doing is you're fulfilling a role. So you're gonna either be some sort of like homemaker, homekeeper, you're raising and rearing the kids, and you are partnering with him and sleeping with him in the hopes that the trade-off will be that you get validation, love, and upkeep. And the man understands and believes that if he continues to fulfill that role for you, then the arrangement works, because marriage is an arrangement. Now, why I say it's prostitution is because
I would also like to say that I'm really trying to pay attention to what this fabulous woman is saying. However, them titties though. Listen, I have been married. I don't think it's sex work. Sometimes I think we just be saying shit to say shit. Stop it. You know what? We don't always have to have all of our inside thoughts outside. We don't. We really don't. I have a lot of inside thoughts that shouldn't be outside.
Because whilst it's not necessarily on the surface you're fucking for a transaction or exchange, there's something that you're fucking for.
But then there's the basis of a relationship. I guess the reason why prostitution is because it's just it's sexual. It's nothing but sex.
It's a
You
straight
get
up
the sex,
transaction.
you go. Whereas a marriage,
Correct.
to even get to the marriage, there would have been a build of a relationship, friendship, gone through a few
Correct.
things, families involved. Maybe you might even have kids now. So I think
Thank
that's why
you.
people would be the
People
difference.
understand that, and why I'm fascinated by that is because what people really miss out on in that conversation and in their opposition to the idea of marriage being a form of sex work is once you stop being able to render that service to the man, he leaves you. So, for example, I've seen countless situations where the woman
That's it. Exactly, Feffy. You just took the words right out of my mouth. Also, it paints marriage as purely transaction, which shouldn't be in the year of the Lord 2024. This is the problem. And again, there's nothing wrong with sex work. I support sex work. I support legalizing sex work and making it so that it's easier and less stigmatizing. I think we would have less of an incel culture if the idea of sex work was not stigmatized and if it wasn't seen as you being sad and desperate, because it isn't. There are plenty of people who engage in sex work because it's simpler, i.e. the transaction, even if they're getting the GFE. And for those of you not in the know, the girlfriend experience. But I think it allows them to engage in a relationship in a way that makes them feel comfortable without maybe all of the trappings, i.e. friends with benefits wouldn't even have to be like a thing for most of us. Listen, no hate to men, but all hate to men. Most men don't engage in friends with benefits properly. They just do the benefits. They don't do the friends. That's how it works. They're like, that's relationship shit. I'm like, no, that's friendship shit. No, I'm not hanging your TV. That's relationship shit. I have a friend living in my house. Hi, Em. Hi. It's fast becoming the Golden Girls in this bitch.
You almost finished?
Yeah, but I don't want to come out. It's the only peace and quiet I've had in 2 days.
If they needed something hung up, I'd hang it up because we're friends. Like, I wouldn't feel like, oh, psh.
Blanche thinks she's Peter Pan and Rose is turning into Mommy Dearest.
That's nothing. You think you're Josephine the plumber.
I think that being able to engage with a sex worker to have that girlfriend experience would be very helpful, or boyfriend experience, or partner experience, whatever term you want to use, because it allows the relationship to be on your terms. But when you're talking about marriage, it's really weird to try to line that up with sex work. It really is, because even if you go way back to when marriages were used to secure property, to secure land, to secure the end of wars and peace, even then it wasn't sex work. It was a transaction, but it wasn't sex work. That's not what it was for. To try to conflate the two is just wild. Whilst women were property, that was the transaction. Women were property. I don't think in modern day marriage, women are property. While there are weirdo men who want them to be, which is why it behooves you to vote. because women's rights are on the line. People with uteri, their rights are on the line. Anyway, while that's true, it's not the same, and trying to conflate them is weird behavior. And sometimes you just leave your inside thoughts inside.
Has gained weight after having children, and the man has decided he doesn't want to be with her anymore because either her libido has lowered, so she's no longer interested in having sex, she doesn't feel good about herself, she doesn't want to have sex, so that man moves on, or the woman becomes disabled or becomes sick and needs long-term care from her husband, and he leaves because he can't be asked and he doesn't want to do that, and he can't have sex with her anymore. So what I've observed is that once men stop seeing you as the person that can fulfill that transactional need that they want from you, their energy switches up very quickly.
Do you think that's the case majority of the time?
I don't like that either. I don't like that either. Because yes, while men, statistically, if a woman gets very sick, leave, like whatever, that's leaving out the percentage of grown ass adults who don't see their wives as just like a baby making machine that takes care of the house. And that's an important distinction to make, because there are plenty of men who have stayed with their wives through sickness and health. Actually, there's the words right there in the vows. There are plenty of men, and this is a very binary conversation, but if she is for whatever reason no longer engaged in having sex, they recognize that they need to have conversations with their wives and figure out why they're no longer interested in having sex. These are adults. What we're talking about are unevolved, immature men who don't see women as people. And just because they don't see women as people doesn't make marriage sex work. Like, just because these unevolved troglodytes leave their partners, because they would leave any partner. That's the fun part. Regardless of it, they would leave any partner if any of these things befell them, because that person is a need to fulfill a role in life. So like, for those types of men, getting married was a role in life that they were fulfilling. So like, for instance, when I was married, and when my ex-husband suggested divorce, thank God, oh my God, I was already making the plan to escape, but I didn't have the money to escape. But then he was like, should we get divorced? And I was like, fuck yeah, I need to be able to like live my life. And I hate you so much that literally I'm choking on it when I go to sleep. Anyway, when he suggested that, I felt that a large part of that, one, was him trying to like force me back into having low self-esteem and allowing him to control all of the narratives. But most importantly, I luckily could not have children. I did not want to have kids. And whenever we even started talking about adopting children and all of these things, I was very adamant about certain things that would have to take place. And he didn't like the things that I said about having kids. And I think that in his mind, once he realized he wasn't going to be able to control me and he wasn't going to be able to trap me with a baby, he was out, right? Because I'm not a human being to him. I think that that played a large role in it. I wasn't a person to him. I was someone who made him a better man every day. Like, these are the things. If you're in a loving, actually caring relationship with an evolved person who has spent time understanding themselves, these kinds of things aren't going to end your relationship. So trying to conflate people not seeking therapy and help, especially like men not seeing women as human beings, with sex work is just, again, wild take. I don't agree with that.
Because I really can't even disagree, or like, my first impulse isn't to disagree. I have questions, because I feel like she's making a point the way I do, which is to just say the most extreme version of some shit first, to like point in the direction of maybe a slightly more nuanced or like fleshed out kind of a concept. So I really can't even disagree, because especially that point that she makes at the end is like, if you kind of want to say the way marriage has been set up historically and still presently is not really much of a winning deal for women, and they tend to lose out once they're not fulfilling their end of the transaction. It's like, that's a pretty fair point that does bear out on a lot of different statistics when it comes to men staying with their women after injury, after illness, in prison, when you talk about labor in the home and where that's shared. And it's like, yeah, marriage is kind of a woman being a bang maid.
However, that is not how the relationship started. And it's really important that we not conflate the two. Like, the relationship was started as two people who, in this scenario, fell in love and started to get together, had the relationship, etc., etc. It didn't start out as a transaction. Also, again, when people talk about historically, like, yes, women were property, but I think people forget that a lot of kings and queens had completely separate wings of the castle, and oftentimes only met to try to conceive a child. I don't think people recognize that. The king often had whomever it was he was banging. The queen often had whoever it was she was banging. They were literally over here, and then they would meet here to try to make baby. That was the thing. The marriage was not necessarily about them loving each other, because love only showed up around the Industrial Revolution, I believe.
Throughout history, people have gotten married for a variety of reasons, and love was sometimes one of them. However, it wasn't such a common practice in the West that it became a well-known truism.
I could be wrong.
That didn't start until the 18th century, when the idea of marriages based on romance as an ideal started to slowly emerge.
I read that a long time ago.
Businesses and factories weren't the only thing that the Industrial Revolution, revolutionized.
And I don't know if it's still true.
As people began to move away from family areas and into more densely populated cities, we saw the rise of Enlightenment-era ideals that focused on individuality and the happiness of the individual.
Maybe I'm spreading misinformation.
I could be spreading misinformation.
But I feel like that's true. Around the Industrial Revolution, that is when marriage for love started to take hold and become a more normal thing.
With people moving away from the influence and protection of their parents' households in order to make livings in large cities, all of this newfangled Enlightenment talk about the individual as opposed to the group or collective is theorized to have impacted marriage trends.
So even when you're talking about historically, I feel like a lot of people don't understand that these marriages of quote unquote convenience.
What marriage had in common was that it really was not about the relationship between the man and the woman. It was a way of getting in-laws, of making alliances, and expanding the family labor force.
Because it was really to connect things. And like, yes, as it gets further along, women still don't have rights. And even today, marriage does not benefit women. But I don't think it's sex work, and I think it's weird to conflate it.
To a husband. And even that trade of like, oh, well, he's paying for her lifestyle, that shit doesn't even exist anymore. So it's like, what are you being paid for? So it's work. Say again?
No, I want you to continue.
So it's labor, it's work in the sense that it's labor.
It's unpaid labor.
Labor in the household. And so then I could kind of disagree and be like, okay, well, kind of aren't all relationships transactional?
Oh, wait, hold on. Let me move this. Boop. Okay, go.
In some way, and we can frame them in the context of labor. You can kind of frame anything in that context. But again, I would have more questions than like straight disagreement. Like my question would be is, one, do you think that same thing is true in like lesbian and gay relationships? And then my other question would be, what, if anything, about straight relationships would make that not the case? Those would be the two things that I would just be curious to see what was said in response to this whole
I like
concept.
your question, and
I'm
going to answer.
Yeah.
Even before he answers. And this is, again, why gender and all of this is like so important, because we wouldn't say that in a queer relationship. Although some of y'all weird and very much insist on knowing who's top and who bottom. And I just need you to know it's none of your business. Stop asking.
Stop it.
You can wonder, you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with having questions here. Have the question here, but you don't say it here. I don't think we would do that with queer relationships. And this is why it is important for us to expand past gender roles and gender as a concept, because in queer relationships, we don't question these kinds of things as to whether or not it's sex work that they're married. And I think part of that too is because queer relationships and marriage is a very recent part of history, if we want to be very real about it. It's a very recent part of history. So we haven't really had time to try to dissect a queer relationship the way we do heteronormative relationships. Yes, there is unpaid labor in the home. I do think that the problem with, again, trying to conflate it towards sex work is that is not what people went in. Like, a lot of women did not go into a marriage with the idea that they were going to take on all of the housework. Obviously, we have stay-at-home moms. That's a different conversation. But the majority of the quote-unquote like 50-50 marriage did not go in with the idea that she would have to be like raising a grown man, doing all of the laundry, doing all the housework, doing all the emotional labor, taking care of the children. Like, that's not the idea, right? When it starts, it's like, we're going to be different. And then somehow it falls back into gender roles, which is why, once again, gender is garbage. Stop it. This is why we're not getting ahead. This is why we need to have our non-binary folks, so that y'all can just get it together.
Get yourself together, man.
Those are extremely great and valid questions that I would like to hear responses or answers to. Because, I mean, shit, unlike you, I definitely can start out disagreeing.
Disagree? Okay, hit me with
Hell yeah.
Not, like, super harsh on, like, misogynistic disagreeing, but, like...
Hey, go get into it.
Disagreeing isn't misogynistic.
Like, one thing that kind of, like, irks me a little bit, like, one thing that irks me is, like, sometimes when we have these conversations about, like, you know, sex in marriage, or, like, you know, women having sex with men, or, like, and then, like, they just talk about sex as just such this thing that women don't even enjoy doing. Like, if the man wasn't pressuring them, if there wasn't some societal pressure for women to have sex, they wouldn't be able to have sex at all.
Wait, here's the thing. I'm going to let him finish his point.
Sex not mutually enjoyable for you niggas?
But you know the point that's going to get made.
Oh my God, like the man, he doesn't fulfill the needs. Like he doesn't do it, you know, is that like sort of kind of where it's going?
Yeah, orgasm gap, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not even orgasm gap. Babes, let me tell you a little story about women having sex. So first of all, women traditionally are made to feel absolutely, completely and totally ashamed of engaging in any kind of self-gratification. Religion or no, both of these things can make you feel very much that when you grow up, you're not allowed to figure out what you like. And so while we're out here busy not being allowed to engage with ourselves in any way, shape, or form, men are out there tugging that rope, or whatever euphemism you use for whatever it is that they do. Pulling the hose. I don't know. I don't have one of those. Rub and tug. Is that what it's called? If they were to get caught doing that, aside from religion, it would be kind of like an awkward moment for like a dad, but also like a proud moment. Like, oh, he enjoys his snake. I don't know. I'm not a man. But if a person with a vagina were to get caught, it doesn't go that way. It's a very different conversation. It's very much like, oh, don't touch it. You're a dirty girl. Nobody likes you. And today, if you call me a dirty girl, well,
she's not a slut. Thank you, Doris. She is the slut.
anyways, the point is, I think women grow up with a completely different set of rules around sex and self-exploration. Then once you finally work past that barrier and start engaging with men very specifically, you very quickly discover that a lot of times men are having sex to you, not with you. And that is a big reason why a lot of women talk about how they don't like it and how it's not fun. I have a strong feeling that a large amount of people with vaginas who are asexual may have that sensation because of the fact that they have not ever engaged or been able to engage in mutual, like doing the hand motions. You got to look at it. The point is that women in general aren't being able to mutually engage. And then you add on top of that men get so damn sensitive if you even say anything, being like, hey, so you know, like that move you were doing? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, what made you? Where did you? And you really just want to ask, like, what adult film did you watch that made you think that I would like that? It was off-putting, to say the least. If you say something, a lot of times they get upset, they get mad, they get angry, and can become violent. It could also become a situation where they're so annoyed that then they don't want to engage because they think that you're like constantly judging their performance, which isn't what you're trying to do. I just want this to be great for both of us. And instead you're doing weird things or trying things without asking me. Like, we should have some conversation sometimes about what we like. Like, the orgasm gap isn't just because of men. It's mostly because of men, but it's also very much because of how women are socialized to not be able to enjoy having an orgasm, period, just to start there. And then you just keep adding all these layers onto it so that by the time you get down to it, it's like, I just don't really like this at all because y'all just don't care whether or not we're having a good time. And if y'all would just look somebody in the face, you would know. Don't be listening to the noises. And please don't think that them kegels she's doing is really doing something. Like, she's just doing that for you to stop. If them kegels start within like 45 seconds of you being indoors, babes, you need to have a conversation after is what I'm going to say.
I don't disagree with you, but that would be the pushback.
For sure, because it's just like, because when we have these conversations, it's framed in a manner that sex is the last thing a woman would ever want to do with a nigga. Like, it's just labor. It's just, I ain't hear a whole goddamn, not even a fish flapping out of water, goddamn it. It's like, you know, and so like, that's one thing I don't really care about in the conversation. But in terms of like the sex work is so different from actually having sex and being in a relationship.
Correct.
Versus it purely being transactional. Like,
yes.
There's a deep chasm in like the things that make those two different. Like, yes, as a guy, I have never purchased coochie before, but I can understand why a nigga would and why niggas do on the intellectual level.
Hell yeah.
I get it. I can understand that. Man, we also support motherfucking sex workers, baby. You know what I'm saying? Round of applause.
Thank you for being involved.
When you bust your nut, that's it. You're not responsible for emotional labor. You're responsible for being like, not being a jackass, not being a fucking thief or some shit, but like, just, you don't have, that is it. You go home, you do whatever you was doing.
Wait, as the patron?
As a patron, yes. As a patron, yes. So there is no sort of whatsoever, or there's not the expectation of emotional aftercare, unless that might be a thing that you are into, that you want. It's just transactional. I'm paying you for a service. And I'm not even up here because, like, look, goddamn it, I have been on this podcast on record many a time saying, look, when you have sex, goddamn fuck like you got a point to prove, goddamn it, you know what I'm saying? Swing for the fences, but niggas don't be on that type of time, unfortunately. You're not there to please the woman. You just there to get your rocks off, have some sort of intimacy, move on. When you're in a relationship, most of the time, not all the time, of course, I'll say at least 60%, half the time, I'll just say half the time, you are more inclined and more likely to provide like emotional aftercare, like really give a fuck about what they got going on.
listen, this is an inside thought that y'all about to get because of who I am as a person. It should be that. Here's the thing. I think that a lot of times, just in general in a relationship, men don't recognize that they still need to be doing all of the things that they were doing before that got you turned on and ready to like wanna, you know what I mean? I love that all of my euphemisms for sex are just like weird hand signals and body motions. So like, just if you're not watching it, I don't know what to tell you, but go back and like look at the motions if it, you know, makes you happy. Like to the point where it starts feeling scheduled in. I used to tell him all the time, because he's a technician, I don't know why you think that I want to get with you after work. I'm not sure how many times I have to tell you that you need to take a shower, because I'm uninterested in all of that. Like, I don't find it sexy. I don't like the smell of diesel. Is not hot. Did I say that? Yes.
I lied.
Listen, I'm just going to put it as plainly as I can. Nobody wants salty dick.
It's not just so transactional in just such a black and white way. Like, I'm not directly paying you and then like, all right, get out, wife. Like, we still sleep in the same bed. We wake up in the same morning. We deal with each other's issues. Your problem's my problem.
There's so much happening in a relationship. 100%. There's so much. So there's so many more things that you're doing in a relationship. But which is why, like, I said I can neither agree or disagree, because I think you can, because I make points the same way. And so I think when I'm looking at her point, I'm kind of looking for like what's true or insightful about it, as opposed to like, do I disagree with the most extreme framing of the thing? Because she kind of said it when she introduced it. Like, I know this is controversial, but you know, marriage is basically prostitution. But then it's hinting at all of these kind of more particular points
that she didn't reference. Some she did, but I mean, like,
I heard them. I can see what is
you
being
read between the lines, my brother.
I mean, it's like a 60-second clip. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I know the things that are maybe being gotten at. So like when I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay. So the question that I would have in his light pushback, because again, I'm not even saying I agree with her most extreme point, but when we talk about like domestic labor or second shift labor or emotional labor, what is labor is work. That's what we mean when we say that. So when we talk about like, because we talked about it a ton on the podcast, when we talk about women are put in a position, even in the modern era, where everybody's working, everybody's college educated.
Okay, but both parties should be putting in emotional labor, which is what old boy in the red hat said. You should both be doing that. The only reason that you would be saying that marriage is sex work, my opinion, is that what you're trying to say, from what I can gather in that short clip that we saw, is that women are doing all of this labor and it's unpaid labor and men don't respect that. Therefore, that must make it sex work, which is a wild leap to take, my opinion. It's a very wild leap to take. Like, you can't just take this like weird leap off into left field, because men also, not a lot that I'm aware, men have done those things where they carried the emotional labor in a relationship and they did all of this stuff only to not have it reciprocated in one way or another. The reason we refer to it as labor is because it is work, but we're also saying that one side shouldn't have to carry it all. So if you get hung up on the term labor, then yes, it's very easy to try to equate the two things and be like, marriage is sex work. But if you're really recognizing that like these are things that both parties should be doing as part of a relationship, then you're not going to see it that way. And you wouldn't be able to agree in any way, shape, or form with what she's saying. Like, just because you saw my feet on Instagram doesn't mean I'm doing feet work. You know what I'm saying? Okay, I'm done.
Doing like overwhelmingly a disproportionate amount of the domestic and second shift labor in the home. The dishes, the laundry, the planning of birthdays, the making sure that the kids have their vaccines and all that kind of shit is largely being done by women. And the intellectual, mental labor of managing the household, even when even the most helpful allies of men are going, oh, I'd love to help in the household. Sweetheart, just tell me what you need help with. And it's like, you fucking idiot. I need you to be an adult. Like, I'm not your manager in the home. We're partners. You know what the fuck, how dishes work. These are your children. I don't need to tell you how to take care of them. Do some thinking, use your brain.
Man, I talk about this sound real fucking good, but I mean, like, yeah, it should sound good. Like, men do need to be more active and more thoughtful in terms of presence in the home. But when you got a person that takes ownership of a lot of that shit, and that's what I find like a lot of some women like kind of might naturally do, because they might feel like that's what they need to do. And then let you motherfucker come in and try and do some shit and you did it wrong, or like you just tried to take some initiative and you did the wrong thing. It's like, why you do that? I was about to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I know you do. You fucked the whole rotation. But ultimately, you're right.
Two things can be true. But I know, and that's a caveat that I made even then.
One thing is a control issue, especially because if your relationship has not been co-partnering throughout, that's why that happens. I will definitely say, if you've been doing the majority of the housework and your partner is like trying to help you, and they're doing things not the way that you're used to them being done, it's kind of difficult because let's say for 5 of the 7 years of this relationship, in which 6 of them you have cohabitated, you've been the one doing all the work. It's not that you're ungrateful for them trying to help, but it's like they're not really trying to make sure that they're doing it, and they shouldn't have to do it the way you want to, let me say that. But I do think that it is an adjustment because you've been doing all of that work. That's why you get that snippy, that's not how you're supposed to do it, like da 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 da. That's why it gets like that. You haven't been helping all this time and now suddenly you're trying to help, whether you voiced it or not. It doesn't make it a point of conflict in the relationship when you're trying to step up all of a sudden, especially if you've been talking about this for years and how you don't step up, and now you're stepping up, but you're not exactly doing the things the way that your partner has been doing them for a very long time by themselves. That's anything. That's even getting into a relationship. It's hard for you to reconcile that like there is another person who lives in the house with you who might need these things or whatever. It can be very easy for you to just kind of forget and not be as kind, caring, and understanding as you should be.
But I think that we have to concede that part is like a smaller part than the main issue. I don't think niggas try enough. I agree. So when niggas try, a lot of times it's the tyranny of the tidy, and a woman will be like, "You're fucking it up. Just let me do it myself." Da, 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 da. And I agree. And fuck, even half of that is justified because it's like one, niggas will do the what do you call it, weaponized incompetence shit, where they fuck it up on purpose or half on purpose because they are waiting for her to say, "Fuck it, I'll do it myself." Or a nigga decides to try 10 years into a relationship. And it's like, cool, even if that is good, obviously there's gonna be some frustration if she's created a system that now functions where she's having to do too much labor in the first place, and you're now trying to insert yourself to help. Of course there's gonna be some frustration because it wasn't a conversation early in the relationship of like, cool, how are we splitting up labor? How is this gonna work? So
okay, young buck. Look at you. All grown.
I think that, yeah, just two things can be true. I agree with that point, and I do think that women to some extent have to work with the men that are trying, but I don't think enough men are trying for us to act like that's the focus.
Period.
In the grand scheme of things, I would say, in the grand scheme of things, I do agree with you.
Yeah.
So the point that I was getting at just in general is in those situations, we do talk about it as like labor, as work. You're doing domestic work in the home in exchange for having a partner who maybe is paying for some of the bills or maybe who is dicking you down. But it's an exchange. And I think when you talk about it being work, what that kind of does is it helps point to whether or not things are fair or not.
I don't think it's an exchange. I think that when you view these kinds of things as an exchange, that's where we're running into the issue and or problem. I honestly think that in today's age, you're looking at a partnership and you're thinking that we're getting into a relationship, you move in together, I'll do the laundry, I'll do the dishes, and like all of these things. It's not necessarily supposed to be an exchange. Now, what you're talking about, sir, would be like a potentially sugar baby relationship, maybe a green card relationship. That is an exchange, and that's a different thing. I feel like people very consistently keep trying to do this with marriage, where they keep using the word in exchange for, like, and you're talking to someone, I don't like marriage, I don't believe in marriage, I didn't believe in marriage when I got married, mistakes were made, but I don't think that we need to keep using in exchange for when we talk about marriage, because I think when we continuously do that, then we're still relying on old ideals of marriage, and we need to move marriage into the present right now, which isn't that.
Or evenly divided. Because I think if you just go, oh, we're just in a relationship, and if someone says, oh, I feel like I'm doing too many of the dishes, then it becomes, oh, well, why are we playing tit for tat? Like I bring home the bacon, I have a job, da da da. But if you talk about it in terms of labor, you go, here is the effort and the loss that I take from being in this relationship, and I'm looking to what are the things that you're bringing and the labor that you're putting in and the loss that you're having in this relationship, so that we're both holding each other up. And what does that look like? And sometimes it's hard to have that conversation without getting kind of economic with it and being like, okay, cool. If I'm a housewife, I'm doing all of this labor in the home, and yes, you're putting a roof over my head and giving me an allowance. But if we break up, I don't have nothing. I'm not earning money from this labor, but it...
Wait, this is muy importante. Que do you know how many times like people will see like a celebrity divorce, also justice for Meg Ryan, a celebrity divorce where the woman is just like a regular lady and she's getting like so much money and royalties and like da da da, and people are just like losing their minds about it. Like, oh, this is where brokies start being like, she takes half, yo shit, she didn't do nothing. Okay, I just need you to understand that in order for this man to get where he got, she took on a large amount of that home. She took on a large amount of the emotional labor. She was probably the person most likely that he was bouncing ideas off of in the middle of the night. She was the one who kept everything running while he was on his rise to fame. When he decided to trade her in for whatever reason, or they just weren't having like a good time, she did not work. She stayed home. She took care of everything. That is a form of labor. And like the reason we have to refer to it as such is because we have to recognize that just because someone is staying at home as a wife, as a partner, and they are taking care of your children and they're taking care of the home, that is something that has value. That's the point, that it is something that has value. Because if you should wind up in a position where you are no longer happy with one another and you have decided to divorce, that value should be taken into account when you're deciding how you're going to split up assets, etc. Because when someone gives up their ability to go to college, especially a woman, when she gives up the ability to go to college, she's like, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to support you while you go to med school. I'm working this job so that you can have da 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 da. I'm going to do this and this and this. I'm going to raise our children while you're doing this and this and this. And then if the relationship ends, you act as if those 10 years of her shouldering all of this is valueless. That's the problem. That's why we're referring to it in that regard. Because what's happening is a lot of women who stay at home and or who help build their man to be where they need to be. And should the relationship end or when it ends, he's trying not to pay her anything. He's trying to do her dust. For what? Like, because he's mad? And so his idea is like, you're just not going to get anything from me and you don't deserve that? That's weird behavior. Like, you have to recognize that somebody has put all of this energy into you. They poured into your cup to allow you to be successful. That labor should be recognized when a relationship ends. That's all. That's where it comes from. That should be recognized when the relationship ends. It should not just be like, fuck you, you get nothing. It's why there's so many stay-at-home moms on TikTok who caution against you doing such a thing and caution against you being a trad wife. If they're ex-trad wives, they caution against these things because there's like, listen, when it all ends, you are left with nothing and they will pay you nothing. You don't have a degree. You haven't had a job in multiple years. You are now in a very vulnerable position in which it's difficult for you to be able to provide for yourself. And on top of that, they may take this opportunity to take your children from you and make it seem like you're unfit. And or worse, they may not want to take care of the kids at all. And you're the one who has to take care of these kids with no job, no education, no money from them. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to raise 3 children by yourself without any way to get a job? You've been out of the market for a long time. That's why women are warning you against it, is because they're like, you need to take care of all of these things. You need to get your education. You need to make sure that that's taken care of. You need to make sure you have your own money, your own source of income, no matter what it is, so that you can put this money in a bank account that only you can touch. Because if for any reason things should go wrong, you need to be able to support yourself and or your kids. You should not be in a position where you're at the mercy of this man. That's the issue. That's the issue.
It is labor in any other context.
I feel that. And I mean, I'm not even, again, not a hill, I'm not down, and I'm not even disagreeing with the fact that women might lose out more on in being married and being in like these like long-term relationships, especially with the wrong digging.
They do.
I be goddamn saying, why the fuck y'all want to get married so goddamn bad and I can't cheat? Well, y'all niggas say, oh yeah, women lose out.
Conditioning.
Women actually doesn't serve. It doesn't. Marriage doesn't serve women as well. Like, oh yeah, it's fine.
Conditioning.
Why the fuck y'all want to get married so damn bad? But anyway,
Conditioning.
You forgot to say fuck niggas at the end of it. That's how you. Why y'all want to get married? Niggas is trash. If you just said that at the end of it, then it'd be fine.
Yeah. But I mean, what it seems to me is, in terms like after marriage, right? The courts tend to side with the woman more often than not. Because it seems like, because I think Alvin had like one of the statistics. I was like,
I hear this a lot about divorce. My favorite thing is overwhelmingly women are the ones who file, and overwhelmingly the courts support women. What people fail to recognize and or realize, I'm on an and or kick, a lot of times the men don't show. So when it comes to custody, men don't show. There is a court case. They are ready. They go to court to discuss the custody of the kids. Men don't show up. When it comes to filing for divorce, a lot of times men do not show up for that either. And they won't file because a lot of men don't want to be seen as the reason that the marriage failed. So they can tell everybody that she filed for divorce, not him. And she just gets tired of waiting for him. So she's like, okay, fine, I'll file the papers. Like, you know, we're not going to stay together. You know that there's nothing that you can do to fix this. It's done. It's over. Let's move on. We don't even live together. What the fuck? The courts don't necessarily favor women because when men go to court to obtain custody of their children, they actually do win the majority of the time. The only reason they're not winning right now is because they don't show. Because, as many have said before me, once a man has moved on from the mother, he doesn't care about his fucking children either. Not all. Don't everybody come in here get mad, but like that happens a lot.
Marriage, like women kind of like lose more, but post marriage, like divorce, that's the courts definitely side more with the woman. Like and the scales aren't balanced there. And I'm not even about to jump on the goddamn men's rights, fucking whatever, with that. But
listen, I'm kind of a dick about this, but I just need men to know, like, first of all, stop tripping about that $50 in child support, okay? It's not doing what you think it's doing. And you're not even paying it anyway. You work some under the table job just so you don't have to pay $50 to support your own child. And I'm going to tell you right now that child support would not even be needed if men cared about being fathers. No hate to these men, but if they cared about being fathers, that wouldn't even be needed. I have seen people and known people who have joint custody. They don't have a court-ordered arrangement because he is a father invested in his child being raised. If $200 needs to show up, he makes $200 show up because that impacts his child, their child. He is interested in raising their child and making sure that their child does not suffer because the two parents don't get along and could not make their relationship work. That is a completely different thing. Men oftentimes are very short-sighted when it comes to these things. They very often try to be like, well, women win this and women get child support. If y'all cared about being a father, this wouldn't be necessary. The majority of the time when a woman is taking you to court for child support, it's because you've already failed. You already stopped paying attention to your child. You weren't coming around like you were supposed to. And when you did come around, it was unscheduled. And then you're not putting any financial help into raising this child. And at some point, she has to recognize that it is important for her child to have stability in their lives, where you can't just show up unannounced, being weird, where you are actually having to either be a participant or just be a check. Whichever one you want to do, you choose. But women in general aren't taking men to court every single day. I'm saying in general, don't lose your minds. They're literally doing it because they have no other choice. They're recognizing that you are just not going to be the father that's needed. You're not going to do the things. At the very least, can you please just pay a little money? The amount of times I see men screaming about child support cracks me up. I'm like, y'all scream about something. And like, if y'all were fathers, you wouldn't even be having this conversation. But I guess y'all don't want to talk about that.
Rethinking and reimagining what we are looking for out of relationships while being realistic with ourselves. And also like stepping up to the plate, especially, and I mean, goddamn, as I say the shit before I say it again, baby man, goddamn man, be fucking up the ecosystem more than women. That's for goddamn sure. So it's like, man, gotta definitely step it up, and man, gotta step it up. We gotta step it up and do better for ourselves unto each other. And I think that will like cascade over into like our other relationships and how we treat one another. Therefore, providing an example of how we expect to be treated in a divine masculine sort of way, if that's your thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like divine
doing
masculine.
damage control at the end. Doing damage control at the end of that take for some reason.
I mean, that wasn't the purpose. That's just
okay. I retract that. Understood as a point. Yeah. So I think there's I don't know if I would say marriage is prostitution, because then like what's the difference between marriage and a relationship? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because then that you would have to continue that point and be like, no, just being in a relationship with a man is sex work. And I mean, men make these arguments of like, oh, well, if I take you to dinner and we have sex, then that's you basically being a sex worker and that kind of thing. So it's like there's some interesting points buried within that for sure. Like, I think maybe a point that would be harder to disagree with is that in relationships, sexual labor is a thing that happens.
Yeah,
I think that would be harder to argue.
Yeah, you're not always in the mood, because like that is something that you do need to be wary of. Like any person that's been married for like a long time, or like a lot of people know, like, well, what's one thing that you think kills your relationship? Like our lack of intimacy with each other. Like once we like lost focus on that, or we just let that kind of die, we just became roommates. And then like everything else just went to shit from there.
But I also think that like men just kind of stop doing the things, and women do too. But I think that when it comes to a relationship, I think that oftentimes men stop doing the things that made you want to like hop into the bed with them, that made you get that tingly feeling. Now all of a sudden it's just like, hey babe, you wanna, and you're like, oh, so now you're just like asking if we're gonna do it instead of like being romantic, doing something sweet, doing something nice, buy my favorite flowers, get me some chocolate. That's not a guarantee, but just like doing those gestures that make somebody feel warm and gooey and fuzzy, like you care. And then they want to engage. Nobody really wants to just like have scheduled sex is the only thing I can think of, because that's I think what it starts to get like in a lot of long-term relationships. Also, that loss of intimacy happens over time, over not listening to someone's story, cutting them off when they're speaking. Sorry, but we're not in a relationship, so I can cut you off.
So I get that from a point of like labor. It's like, man, goddamn, hey, I don't feel just like, hey, man, I don't feel like recording this podcast tonight, but hey, after I get done with it, I'm glad I did.
Gotta get to work, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, gotta do it. But I don't.
And then you start doing that calculus.
Just like blindly villainize like a man for it. But I think it's just, there's more layers to it. There's more layers to it than just because again, like that sense, there's a lot of layers to that shit. And this might be some damage control, but there's a lot of layers to that shit. And I just hate when I be hearing hearing these types of conversations being had, and just people would just be talking about sex when it comes to the woman like it's just the worst motherfucking thing they could ever do in life. Like they would never have sex with it. I can't believe it.
Let me shoot you some bail here, because one thing that I said earlier, which is my question would be, what would need to change about relationships with men for this to no longer be true in your view, would be a question that I would have had if I were on that podcast. I think that in these conversations, if our argument isn't straight up 4B, like indefinitely, if that's not the stance, then we have to start having conversations about what changes need to be made on the part of men, but also then on the part of women to facilitate those, which is a part of it. Some people might disagree with that, but it is a part of it. In order to make those problems in relationships no longer the case. What norms and the way men are socialized to approach relationships need to be adjusted. And I think that in order to have those conversations, you have to admit to yourself that we all do seek in like a straight context, we all do seek to have these mutually beneficial, mutually supportive, mutually understanding, perceiving the other person fully relationships. So what it takes to do that? And which means you have to admit we want to be loved by men, and as men we want to be loved by women in a true sense, not in just exchanging sex for money or sex for housing or that kind of thing. It's like, no, I want to love you properly. I want to be loved properly by you, and I do want to fuck on you and make sure that you feel good in doing this, and vice versa, like actively. So yeah, I think that would be me shooting bail to your point. I agree. We have to admit that, like, we like each other. We want to make this work in a way that really, really works.
And I think we need to like be honest. I have said this from day none, and obviously this is a neurodivergent part of the whole thing, is that like I don't understand all the weird dancing around. Like, if you like me, say you like me. Why do we have to pretend that I have to go on X amount of dates in order to have these conversations? Why do we have timelines for everything? Like, if you feel the way you feel that way. It's fine. I just think that there are way too many times where one person wants to engage in a sexual relationship. The other person wants to have an emotional and sexual relationship, and neither one are communicating that until we get to the point. I'm not saying women don't do it, but I'm saying men very specifically have got to learn to be honest about what it is that they want, even if that means you don't get to have sex with the person you want to have sex with.
So with that being said, I'm just going to end it off on that because I feel like that was an excellent summation and some bars that my good brother Eddie?
My brother? Yeah, look.
His name is Eddie.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, that was some good bars that good old Edward.
Sibling Eddie Overgold. Yeah, right.
Sibling Eddie Overgold. So if your partner of 3 years breaks up with you via text, you know what I'm saying, you might be seeing a red flag. If you're not willing to have conversations around what needs to change amongst men, women, and partnerships in general, that includes everybody, genderless, gender conforming, or non-gender conforming, NBs, all that good stuff. You know what I'm saying? And if you're not willing to have those conversations in good faith around like what needs to change, then it might be just waving a red flag. It has been your boy Josh. It has been Eddie. Alvin shall return next week, so and you can better believe he'll be have a smile on his face.
I'm going to tell you this. The main reason I watch this or like will listen to this podcast is because of Josh. He has a lot of good points. Here's what I'm going to say. I think that the Josh from this podcast has a way of like, he'll say something, you can like watch him work through it and come out the other side in a positive light. And I like that. Like, I like being able to see adult men have conversations and start on one end of the spectrum and then come out on the other end at the end and go, well, actually, maybe we need to do this and this. This was actually very good. This is one of the reasons I watch it. I think one of the few times I didn't agree with their shit was like the shits and gigs. And I was like, I don't think y'all get it, but that's okay. Overwhelmingly, I think that this was a very good conversation. The podcast is waving the red flag. If you want to check that out, it will be obviously listed in the description box. But I thought this was a good conversation. And I think it's weird that there are people out there trying to conflate sex work and marriage. I think obviously the two things are different. And it's super weird to me when people really try to make them the same thing. Like, please stop doing that. Can we just all agree to like leave the things alone. Sex work is sex work, marriage is marriage, unless of course your sex work is included in your marriage, which means you're in a sugar baby relationship, and that's fine too, babes. Live your life. We have to stop doing that. It's very weird. I get that you want to legitimize sex work, and we also want to very much demean marriage, but as someone who truly, I don't believe in marriage for me, I'm still not gonna say it's sex work. I'm not gonna be able to jump on that bandwagon. Yes, there is a labor involved, but I think that when you have the proper partnership, both parties are putting in emotional labor and all that kind of stuff. So weird thing to say. It's not a flex. And that's it. That's all. Until next time, I am so pretty and so are you. And if this is YouTube, subscribe if you want. And like the video if you want.
What do you say to someone who thinks that all the divorce laws are in favor of women?
It's another guy tactic. It's another BS sort of woe is me and not wanting to accept responsibility for your current circumstance. Here's what a lot of guys will do. They'll say early on in the relationship, I want to take care of you. And then when they do, and they give up their career and they give up their pursuit of an additional degree and they give up their opportunity to climb the corporate ladder and make more money. They've been a stay-at-home mom for 10 years and they're not capable of making an income that they would have been if they had been in the workforce. And then the husbands, when there's a divorce, complain that they have to pay maintenance and they have to pay child support because they've been the stay-at-home mom, caretaker for the kids and caretaker for the household. So no, the laws are not bent in anybody's favor. The laws are absolutely right in the middle, 100% fair.